Welcome to the Plugged In Podcast by Sweetwater. I'm your host, Mitch Gallagher. For this episode of the Plugged In Podcast, we're sitting down with Ian Robinson, one of the founders of Blackstar Amplification, who made the trip all the way from the UK to visit Sweetwater. Ian and I will take a deep dive into tube amps centered around a discussion of Blackstar's innovative St. James amplifiers. These amps combine great all-tube tone and plenty of volume for any gig, yet they weigh a fraction as much as any competing tube amplifier that I'm aware of. Now, there's a lot of tech that goes into a tube amp like this, and we'll be going inside the chassis for a close look with Ian to guide us. It's time to dig deep into guitar amps. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Plugged In Podcast by Sweetwater. Settle in, and let's get started. We have a very special guest with us, Ian Robinson from Blackstar, one of the four founders, right?
Great to meet you, mate.
Yeah, all the way across the pond.
Absolutely, yeah. We've been here for a few days, had a great time at Sweetwater. Totally inspirational place to visit.
Is this your first time you've been here?
No, I was here pre-pandemic, about maybe 5 years ago, but you just forget the whole scale and the vibe about the place.
And it changes every day, so.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it does, yeah. That's what I hear.
There's always something new to see.
It's
always
amazing, yeah. That's
awesome. So, man, I have to say, long ways from the garden shed in 2004 for Blackstar.
Yeah, it is. We kind of always intended that we'd have a kind of a global business. You know, when we set it up, we had quite highfalutin ideas in a way, just because we'd already worked like at the biggest company, right, working at Marshall. So it was always our ambition, and I thought we had enough ideas and talent at the beginning to do something, but it's taken a lot longer than we thought. You know, it's I often joke. Paul and I wrote a business plan when we started, and it was supposed to be 5 years. We'd basically have it done, and we're 16 years in and going strong. But it's the same stuff we're interested in. It's designing brilliant guitar amplifiers and stuff.
Right.
It's what gets us exciting, and that's what we do.
Sure. Well, those ideas are what we want to talk about today, because the tube amplifier, as we all know, goes back decades.
Yeah.
But you've been doing some really innovative things and sort of changing the way that people think about tube amplifiers and what tube amplifiers will be going into the next decades.
Yeah, sure.
So let's talk a little bit about that. You guys are fond of your acronyms, your ISF and your which is so cool. But that's part of it, right? Because the tube amp is what it is. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of different directions you can take that. Tell us a little bit about what your vision is for what a tube amp is and should be.
Well, that's a really broad question, isn't it? Because I think it depends on the use case. Mm-hmm. So there's definitely still room for very, very simple valve amps, you know, whether that's hand wired. We're actually just starting production of the Artisan 30, which was one of our first ever designed in the shed designs. People love that product. It's really simple, you know, tag board, all point to point. And that has a place. And then at the other end, perhaps, is something like St. James, where we're designing a product that is all about the way people want to play now, the way that they want to connect, be interactive. And that inevitably leads to the marriage of all the different types of technology that we have.
Right.
So, and there's a place for everything in between in our minds.
Sure. It really has allowed Blackstar to become a solutions company, because the St. James obviously is a great solution. It's so lightweight, and all the technology that goes into that, and the way you can shape the tone with the ISF and some of the other different technologies you have, the different tube modeling and things. There's a lot of different things there that are perfect solutions for players who need a particular thing.
What we're all about is making guitarists' lives easier, and also really inspiring them to make better music. You know, effectively, the end product is about a guitarist plugging into a product and being inspired, and that's why we do it. Whether that's a Fly 3 at whatever $79, or you know a full St. James stack or something like that, it's always the same end product that we're looking for. It's about something that will inspire people. Right. So yeah, the mission has always stayed the same, and part of that is providing solutions as well, and that's because, you know, there's 45 people at Blackstar, and probably 35 or more are guitarists or musicians. And the people who were making the decisions every day, like myself, Paul, the other Future Products team, we're all experienced musicians, we're all still playing live, and we really empathise with, you know, the requirements of the guitarists. So it's all about providing solutions, yeah.
Right. So I'm curious with you talked about the Future Products team and some of the ideas and things. Do the ideas generally come in-house, or do you see the players asking for things, or where do they come from?
It's completely a mix of all those things. Actually, this goes back in a way to the beginning of our story. So when we were in our Marshall days, the way that new products ideas was decided in those days was very much in the hands of the R&D guys, the design director, who would have an idea and say, this is what I should do. And also, to be fair, Jim used to come back with some ideas from the market and say, I want one of those, which is a great way to work. The thing that we introduced when we were there was a whole process around collecting ideas from the market and then prioritizing them and making that quite a slick process. And that's something we've developed over literally 20 years. And the whole point of that is that we talk to the market, we talk to our distributors, we talk to retailers, we talk to, more importantly perhaps, customers, end users, and then that's, I'd say overall, that might be, quite frankly, maybe about half of it. To be frank, probably the other half is ideas within the team. You know, because we're all creative people, we're all experienced musicians, and it's taking the requirement and then turning that into something that could be usable, and that's the skill. You know, it's like, because a lot of people have a lot of ideas, and then we have to use our judgment to kind of go, well, what are those ideas, and then how are we going to implement them in an actual product. But we do have a process. Like, we have a very strict process by which we say which products we will and won't design, and it's all quite formal, because we just wanted to get away from that one person like Ian go, I think we should do that this week, you know, and we don't want to get to a position where our customers don't know what we're working on. So we're very open with our customers. But yeah, it's a real mix of internal and external.
Well, one of the brilliant standout ideas, we mentioned it very briefly, is the weight change. So many guitar players, myself included, love to have a lightweight amplifier, but the trick there is to get that lightweight amplifier and still get the tone out of it.
So this is something that I'm sure has become more and more prevalent over the last 27 years now that since I left university. Over time, I think it was accepted that, you know, a 2x12 valve amp would be really, really heavy and there was nothing to do. I suppose maybe two things have happened, just thinking about it. One is the demographic, frankly, has got older. Maybe the other thing is that that our expectation of what can be achieved digitally, maybe, or even solid state, has become more and more sort of is higher now. So people have an expectation of convenience that maybe we didn't. You know, maybe we used to think, well, that's what it is, and we put up with it. So I think over time, what that's led to is over time, more and more people have been asking for lightweight valve amps. So we always ask our customers, you know, what do they want, and our reps will be talking to dealers, what are their customers asking for? And honestly, lightweight valve amps was by far number one of all the requests that we had.
Yeah, I guess that's not surprising for all the reasons you mentioned.
Yeah, because people love the sound of valve amps. And absolutely, you know, for all the right reasons, you know, it's like, it is, at the end of the day, still, it's the Shangri-La, it's the pinnacle. And, you know, one might argue that with, you know, we do a lot of digital stuff. But even then, the measure by whether we've got it right or not is, does it sound like a valve amp? You know, that's still like, that's the target, still. And so my kind of, sometimes one could take a view on, well, why don't you use a valve amp then? And I think the problem has been, well, that'd be great, but they're too flipping heavy.
Right.
You know, so now this is that, giving the people the opportunity to use the technology they like, but it be convenient.
Right. Well, the technology is a big part of that because the heavy parts of a tube amp, I mean, those big iron transformers, those high power speakers with the big magnets and all those kind of things, the technology kind of had to get to the point where you could do something about that.
It has been coming for a long time. I suppose for us, we'd never got, literally, just frankly, we never probably got to the point in our product line where we could take an aside and say, let's tackle this now, because it was a very, very big project. So I guess this was probably started around about 5 years ago, and it's been in the market for, about a year or something like that now.
Right.
So it took effectively, I would think, between 3 and 4 years of development, and way over 2 years of full-on development.
I think when you grab it and you pick it up, it's hard to believe that it actually is a tube amplifier.
Yeah. So we're talking about technology, and we're talking about the technology was probably available before. We kind of never got around to it. But I think the way that we approached it is that we analysed every single aspect of the design. And again, that takes a lot of time. So it was finding the convenient time within our roadmap and everything else we're doing is to get around to it, because we knew it was going to be a big one. So yeah, we started this process with I guess it would probably be one of our products or a traditional valve amp, and we literally got it in one of the big meeting rooms, and we step by step analysed every single aspect of a traditional design and brainstormed as a team about what could and couldn't be done. So, and some of the things we weren't sure could be done, to be honest. And maybe, something like, I guess we're going to go through each of the aspects of it, but I'd say all of the things that we changed, it wasn't clear whether we would be able to do it and be successful, because our outcome was that it would be at least as good as a traditional valve amp in terms of tone and feel.
Right.
Yeah, so it was the significant reduction in weight, but no reduction in tone. So that was the mission. So we weren't clear whether we could get there, really.
Yeah. Well, it's an amazing accomplishment. Tell us a little bit about how you did that. What's different with this amp, without giving away any trade secrets?
So we looked at everything. We looked at absolutely everything. We started, an obvious place was the mechanical piece. So we started with the cabinet and the chassis, which make up probably, in terms of the mechanical piece, is non-electronic. The PCB doesn't tend to waste that much, and the smaller electronic components, so it's the chassis and the PCB. So what we did there was we looked at the chassis material and the construction, so that all our amps have to pass really rigorous drop tests. So we had to make sure that when we took material out, so we might have gone, say, for a thinner gauge of metal, but then we had to redesign the way the chassis was constructed so it would still pass the same drop test or be even better. So there's a lot of things you can do within the structure of a metal chassis to make it stronger for any gauge of metal. So we took that to the next level. So it's still a metal chassis, but we've taken some weight out, we've changed the design to make it very robust. And then the big one in terms of the cab and even the head is the type of wood we're using. So we're using, it's a lightweight plywood made out of a material called candle nut, which is, it's prevalent in the Far East in particular. And it's, I think, maybe 30% lighter than birch plywood.
Wow.
Which was a big step forward, and we talked about using it before, but we've never been able to get the right supply, and it hasn't been that available. But this time we made some inquiries, and we were able to get supply of it consistently in volume. But then the thing with that is it going to sound okay? We didn't know until we built some whether it would sound okay, and then there's been a process of tuning those cabs to make them, it's a whole system and amp, so it's not just the cab and the electronics, but there's been quite a lot of work in terms of the baffle construction, the size on the combo, how open and closed back it is. All that stuff's been tuned to make sure it sounds at least as good as a traditional valve amp. So that's just a mechanical piece. And then we could talk about the loudspeaker. So the loudspeaker, we spoke to our friends at Celestium, and for us, we've used neodymium speakers in the past, and they're really, really good.
Yep.
In fact, we used them in the first ever combo, or one of the first ever combos of the Series 1 45 watt. Originally had our own design of Neo that we did with Celestium, which was a great speaker. But there's a certain cynicism around that, or wariness in the market about Neo. It's not everybody's cup of tea.
Sure.
And especially, I think they're a lot better than they were, but in the early days they had a certain kind of unforgiving response, let us say.
Right.
So we said, we don't want to take that risk, because we don't want to have that argument with people about whether it's right or wrong, quite frankly. And neodymium is super, super expensive. You're talking about $100 to us, which is $400 by the time it gets through the retail,
Right.
that, whatever it is.
Yeah, right.
$350, $400 just to put a Neo in it. So we asked Celestium, would they be able to do something with a traditional magnet structure? And they went away and did some prototypes and came up with the Blackstar Zephyr, which is an amazing speaker, really amazing speaker. And again, I wouldn't know, I'll have to look up exactly the weight saving, but I guess it would be, again, 25 or 30% at least. And we based that on, so it's a vintage 30 soft parts, effectively. So, which is, your cone and the dust cap, that stuff, the speaker surround,
Sure.
all based around a vintage 30. But then the magnet structure is where we've saved the weight. But the speaker geometry is very different than a normal. So they're normally like a thick magnet like this in one plane, and what they've basically done is they've milled off all the excess iron that doesn't really contribute to the magnet strength near the coil. And that's what gives you your sensitivity, effectively. It's the coil geometry and the magnet geometry together forms a motor. And what they've done very, very cleverly, and I think they did it through a lot of physical modelling before they built them, was to see how far they could reduce the amount of iron before it started to affect the tone. And then they also did some other stuff then to, around the voice coil.
Sure. Again,
to maybe make some compensations. And what's come out is, as you'll hear, is a really, really natural sounding, loudspeaker and the sensitivity is comparable with a vintage 30, but it's certainly louder than a lot of other sort of traditional guitar amp speakers out there. So that was a huge one. And then the SMPS power supply. By far the biggest weight from an electronics point of view is the mains transformer.
Sure.
And we're a bit of a victim of our own rules and discipline. So Blackstar mains transformers are actually usually bigger than most other people's mains transformers.
Right.
And the reason why is that we specify really stringent heat rise criteria on endurance tests. We set a maximum wire temperature of around about 100 degrees, and they're rated at about 130, so we derate by about 30%. And that's in the most extreme conditions. So I'm really, really strict with our engineers about this, and some of our engineers have worked for other companies, not quite the same. So our idea is you could be on stage in Mexico and the mains voltage is super high and it's 40 degrees and the amp's being played all day for 8 hours with no breaks for the band,
Right.
And it won't break down. And the reason why is we derate. So we have a very high benchmark.
Sure.
And the SMPS design is something we've thought about for a long time, because there are loads of advantages with SMPS, which has never been done before really in valve guitar amps. It's very prevalent in bass amps. I think the majority of bass amps nowadays have SMPS. So it's just another area where we need to catch up with those innovative bass players,
right.
I should say, for my bass playing friends. Yeah. But yeah, so the advantages are it's more compact than SMPS, it's lightweight, it's lower temperature as well, it's more efficient. So it's better nominally, could be better for the environment, but it is a more efficient, electrically efficient design. And all those things gone together with a really important one for professional users is its universal power supply as well, so you can use it anywhere in the world. So the list of advantages are lots.
Right.
The disadvantage, in a way, is it's really difficult to do and to do it well. So that's part of the reason it took so long for us to bring the product to market, because it was a lot of design work, a lot of test adjust, and we're really proud to have been the first people to implement this in a full sort of production, mainstream valve amp.
Right.
And mate, the really important thing is, from input to output of this amp, it's all valve and all analog, right? So the SMPS isn't in the signal path or anything.
Right.
If what customers really need to understand is we've made sure that the purity of the signal path is never affected by any of this stuff. It's just the stuff we could change and take way out without affecting. You remember I went back to the mission statement at the beginning. It's got to sound at least as good as one of our normal valve amps.
Right.
So that's the thing. We want to give people the tone and the technology that they really want without the disadvantages. So I think that's what we've achieved.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's you touched on it in several different ways there, but there's the tone, the actual sound that comes out of the amplifier. There's the technology you're using, but a big part of it that we don't always talk about is the feel and the touch.
Yeah.
And the power supply can be a big part of that.
Absolutely.
And the speakers can be a big part of that as well. So it's not a matter of, I can take a file and just take the edge off that speaker and it'll be lighter. You have to think about all those things as you're doing it.
You're absolutely right. And I think this is the thing about amp design, is it is very much a system. Mm-hmm. So you move one piece and you affect something else over there. So some things work together to our advantage a little bit. So one thing that the SMPS is, it's a kind of a stiff power supply. So it means that as you draw more current, the voltage doesn't really drop. Mm-hmm. It's quite stiff. And what that means is that it can feel more direct. So it's really good for, like fast sort of heavy picking and stuff.
Right.
And also for funky stuff, because, it's very, very immediate. But sometimes you might not quite get the compression effect sometimes that you get with a traditional amp. The thing with the Zephyr, because it's got in a way, it's a slightly softer sounding speaker than a Vintage 30. So it's still really loud, but it's slightly softer. So the two things, in a way, by some sort of happy coincidence for us this time, the two things kind of go together nicely. Because if we'd have put a Neo in there, it might have sounded a little bit too hard overall, the system.
Sure, right.
But then the other thing, which was massive for us, is we've got the SAG function as well, which it's not. So that basically makes what can you say? It introduces that same dynamic effect that you'd get in a traditional old valve power supply. So as the output stage draws more current, in SAG mode, the supply voltage lowers effectively into the amplifier. So that gives you that feeling of sort of compression.
Right.
And actually, I'd say, and we set this up with Paul Stevens, so Paul Stevens designed this, not me. But we were all paid. There are a lot of people involved in the design of this, but Paul was the guy who did the hard hours and effectively designed, this amp. And we made a decision talking that actually we wanted the SAG to go maybe a little bit further than you'd get with a valve amp in a way.
Right.
And I love it. So to tell you the truth, I use the 2x12 version of the EL34 and I use it in SAG, and it actually then generates, I think Paul told me sometime, 35, 37 watts of power. But it's valve power, it's still very, very punchy.
Right.
But it's really, really soft. So going back to your original question, it was all about getting the feel as well as the sound, and that SAG feature and the development and R&D we did on that was really crucial to getting that right.
Right. Yeah, guitar players are funny creatures because we've had so many decades with the original amps,
Yeah.
the original designs,
Yeah.
and they perform in a certain
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
But they kind of do their thing. Most
Yeah.
of the, at least up to the more recent decades,
Yeah.
they did. You bought this amp to do this thing.
Yeah.
But now players want more than that, and that's
Yeah.
another part of with your.
Yeah.
What reminded me of that was talking of the side controls, that you can really dial that in the way you want
Yeah.
it. But you have other controls as well that you've developed along the way that
Yeah.
really expand the versatility of a tube amp.
In our whole design process, and right from the beginning, just something you said there was really important to us, was when we did our research originally and when we do our research now. So there are certain things about valve amps and those old designs that people like and are positive. Sometimes they're not necessarily a good engineering solution, because
Right.
you can imagine people, Jim, Leo Fender, back in the day, Jim's design engineers were using whatever parts they could get at the time, and those parts were expensive, so they were trying to use as few of them as possible.
Right.
So you'd end up with, like the tone stack in a guitar amp isn't the best EQ system in the world. It's because it's very interactive. You don't, if you're in a studio, you don't want to be tweaking your treble and the middle moving. You'd
Right.
never put up with that, would you?
Right.
But for a guitarist, that's what we're used to, isn't it? And it's it's an unusual thing about our technology that we do, this little world we live in, is that a lot of the things that we like about valve amps are actually not great from an engineering point of view. But anyway, when we go through the research, we don't change stuff just for the sake of it. We don't go, oh, well, we'll change that EQ but we know people like that EQ. So actually on this one doesn't have ISF. So these are more standard sort of traditional guitar EQs. But for instance, ISF, which we use in other products, we wanted to improve, so to give people more choice in terms of their tone. So we added the ISF, but we still wanted to have that interactivity between bass, middle, and treble. So that's been a little bit of always our secret sauce kind of thing, is the understanding, because we're engineers. Bruce was like, the best engineer I've ever met by a mile, and he was absolutely outstanding. But he understood guitarists want a certain kind of feel.
Right.
So we never change things just for the sake of it. It's always to improve the life of the guitarist. So yeah, and within an amp, within a Blackstar, there's loads of little incremental areas of the circuit that over the years we've developed ways that we like to do things. And again, not because we want to be groovy and say, hey, our amps are different. It's not like that at all. It's all been done with incrementally, with an AB box, and with a whole host of different players with different styles, saying incrementally, does this sound better? Does this
Right.
work better? And that's how we make steps forward.
Right.
There's the big innovations, like the SMPS in here. But then I could pick out a circuit and there'd be, probably a dozen things that we do which are just different than other people. So when we say, why do Blackstar amps sound different? It's because they are different. Mm-hmm. But we only ever do it because we can kind of qualitatively, i.e. by people listening, establish that actually people prefer doing it that way. So it's like the way we manage our high end on these, when I play it in a little bit, it's like we could play with loads of gain, but you've still got a lot of clarity.
Right.
And some of the very high gain amps can be really fizzy, and some people love that stuff, some people don't. But even if we get quite sizzly, we still like to have definition, so you can hear right across the frequency band.
Right.
But the reason why our amps sound like that is not an accident. It's because we design our circuit designs allow that to happen. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there's loads of incremental stuff. We could go on all day about that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that's all part of what allows you to deliver an amp that someone who is looking for tradition will be able to find it.
Yeah.
And that technology is invisible to them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they get all the advantages of all that right inside the package.
Yeah. Mate, you're so right, because this amp's a brilliant example of that, because if you look at the front panel control, it's the most approachable panel control that probably we've ever done, apart from the hand wire stuff. So it's shared EQ. So there's only to the end user there's a shared EQ, right?
Right.
But it isn't just one EQ. It's two EQs. But you wouldn't know. It's a very, very simple. So you got gain volume, you've got a boost switch on, or a second overdrive, and you've got master volume and reverb. It's really simple.
Sure.
but behind the scenes, it's the most advanced valve amp we've ever done.
Right.
Because again, we understand people don't need loads of knobs. They don't want any. Doesn't that sometimes get in the way of the creativity as well? You just want to be able to dial
plug
stuff
in and play
quickly. Yeah.
Which, speaking of, you should.
Yeah.
Will you play a little bit for us?
I can do. Yeah.
Let's hear
so
this
we have a little
amp.
listen.
I think we've been talking a lot about it. We'll come back to more, but
Okay.
we got to hear this thing.
This is more of a kind of American style EQ. So it's got a really nice interactive mid and treble, which allows you to dial in that really lovely sort of traditional kind of very high headroom clean that everybody loves. So just kind of showing you how the treble and the middle control kind of interact.
Sure.
So we were just up with the treble kind of up for something kind of quite funky, as we before. Then just turn that back a little bit, bring in the mids, you get something much more sort of mellow. So
yeah, there's a lot of punch.
oh yeah,
The combination of the amp and the cabinet as well. Like sitting here, I
Yeah.
can really feel that cabinet is thumping. There's a lot of bottom end.
Yeah,
coming out of that cabinet
yeah.
too.
It's a really wide open thing as well. So it's the feedback's on the power amp, and so that tightens things up. And you've got the mid control is quite low down, so it's around about 200 hertz type thing. So it takes out a lot of that low mid. It's a brilliant pedal platform. That's what we wanted that channel to be. We wanted that to be ultra clean, ultra tight, and a great pedals platform.
Sure.
And then I was talking about the two styles of EQ. So these pots are actually dual gang pots. So it means there's two tracks on each of the pots, and they're completely different values between the two sides. So what Paul did is he designed two completely separate preamps. So that's the clean preamp, and then just clicking over. So what we've got on this side is more of a kind of British EQ, but
Okay.
the whole thing changes, okay? So I think we've got a slightly looser power amp damping, and we've got obviously lots more gain, but you've got a completely different EQ structure when you go onto overdrive, so no compromises. So even though it's a shared EQ, you've got the spankiest clean, and then a really big sort of British overdrive. So
that's crazy. So really, a lot of times we think that, okay, we're going to go to the second channel and you just put another tube in the gain stage or something.
Yeah.
That's not what you're doing at all. You really
No,
have
no.
two signal paths inside the app, but again, it's transparent to the user. You don't have to think about it. It doesn't even matter.
Absolutely, yeah. And not only that, we're also switching, and through the different amps that we talk about, we're also switching the power stage as well, which is really not that standard to do. People don't necessarily do that. And again, it's about getting that feel right. So on the cleans, you want it really spanky, you want it really direct. But then on the overdrives, you want to be able to dig in a little bit. So then we change the damping and it just loosens things up.
Wow, that's crazy. That's crazy.
So like all Blackstars, when you turn the volume down, but you turn the volume up, then you just get more and more gain. That's a really distinctive thing about Blackstar, about how clean it can be. Bit more volume. Over to the humbucker, so again, just boosting that level. And you get all those, just with the gain down there, you can get all those sort of classic. And then there's like a third level of gain on here. So we can go switch up the gain. And again, with this one, when we go onto the higher gain setting, we're taking the power amp damping off. So it gives you real sizzle on the high end and kind of a looser bottom end. That's kind of half gain, and then we go really whack the gain up.
I also have to say that is that's a testament to the Zephyr speaker, because sometimes speakers are great for clean sounds, not so great for heavy sounds. It's not often you get a speaker that really covers authentically both ends of that spectrum.
Yeah. We do, there's a lot of tonal shaping in these amps as well, which perhaps we wouldn't normally have in a traditional valve amp design. So it's all about managing, a lot of it for me is about managing top end, trying to get the top end natural even with a lot of overdrive. So yeah, very, very simple guitar control layout, but a huge amount of flexibility.
Yeah, and a lot of technology going on behind the scenes. A lot of things that nobody thinks about.
Yeah, but remember, input to output, it's all analog, it's all valve.
Right.
There's nothing freaky or, anything to worry about there. It's all the sound you want, all the feel you need, but in a really, really super convenient package.
Right. And speaking of that, I have to point out one other feature that's super cool. You can drop the power on this amp as well, which makes it even that much more versatile and usable as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So power reduction is something that's kind of been done before. This is a version of dynamic power reduction, which we had a patent on from the early days. But this is a fixed version of the original dynamic power reduction. You could go from 100 watts down to 10 watts, but continuously. On this amp, you can go from 50 watts down to 2 watts, and then you have the intermediate sag, and at sag then that's about 37 watts, but it's more compressed. So you can use it in any kind of situation. You can use it at home or in the studio, use it in 2 watts. Rehearsal, you might use it. I actually use it quite often in 2 watts at rehearsal with a live drummer. Sometimes it's that, it can still really hold up its own. But then maybe sag gives you a little bit more direct of a dynamic direct sound. And then going up to full power, is really punchy. And in a way, it's even more punchy, they say, than a traditional valve amp, because that SMPS is pretty quick. So it means that for that very fast sort of palm mute stuff, or for the funky stuff, it really holds up really tight. So it gives you all those different options.
Right.
So I could just give you a little, should we have a little listen to that?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. I'll go back onto crunch, but not a lot of gain. And take that down. But what I'll do is drive the power amp really hard. So I'm going to go down to 2 watts. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go from 2 watts but take it up to 50 watts and hear how the response works. Master volume on full. You can hear all that sort of power amp back end niceness that's going on, which you wouldn't be able to do if you just turn the master volume down. It'd be a completely different feel.
Right.
So for recording, you can play at that kind of level. Then I'll just bring it back up through the sag. So now we're talking about 37 watts. I'll just turn down the master volume a little bit. But now it's like really soft, but much more dynamic, but quite soft. then go into full power, which is much more dynamic. So. All those options, just a simple flick of a switch.
Right. And you can, sometimes with amps that have ways of dropping the power level down, you don't hear much of a change, but maybe as a player you feel it. But I'm really hearing it. I mean, I'm hearing the attack is very different at 50 watts than at the SAG, and certainly at 2 watts as well, in a good way. I mean, it's another usable paintbrush, if you will, in your palette.
It's got that really natural valve power amps breakup, which you can't get from the preamp. It's just impossible, to get that. But to do it traditionally, you'd have to have it this loud. Your neighbours aren't going to appreciate that, or in the studio, or actually, even more nowadays, live. Sound guys don't want to do that. So the brilliant thing about this is you can run the amp on stage, maybe in 2 watts, and still have your cab rigged output, direct output to front of house, and you've got very controlled stage volume, but you've still got a absolutely sort of saturated valve power amp, which is the sort of sound and the feel that you want to get. So it gives you the best of both worlds being able to do that.
Right. And that does bring up some of the other features of the amps that, again, take it into that more modern world, even though, again, it's got the more traditional tones that we all are looking for. Things like the effects loop, the USB output, and so on.
So it's interesting that when we started the design, it was all about taking the weight out, and then over time that really evolved into something far more than that in terms of the product. So one of the main things is that we've got in this, we've got the best of our valve technology, but also the best of our digital technology. We've got a full in-house DSP team, and we've been working on DSP for most of our time, but for well over a decade we've been developing all kinds of different DSP algorithms, all based on the history and the knowledge that we have from the valve world. So kind of unique in terms of our knowledge base. So when I've heard this quite a lot recently, a lot of companies are having to catch up on the digital side. The traditional companies, we're going to have to hire a team, we're going to have to get this knowledge because we've never had it. We've always had that. It's always been what we've done. So this product is one where we've really taken the marriage of the two to take the product to a whole different level. And the cab rig is really the area where that works so amazingly.
The amount that is behind the amplifier, and again, I just keep coming back to the result, is what you've got is a boutique amplifier that you plug in and you turn the knobs and you play. And that's what matters to the player. But to understand how much is happening behind that faceplate is really, really fascinating. I really appreciate you coming in and sharing all that with us. It's,
no problem,
it's tremendous.
Thank you very much. And, for me, the real message is, in a way, is give these amps a try, because we've gone to extreme lengths to make sure that the really important bit, the input to the output, is all valve and analog. I'll just say it one more time. There's nothing to be worried about. And actually, these amps sound better than traditional amps, just because they've got 15, 16 years and 25 years of my design heritage. And the team, Paul's been working in this industry longer than me. Paul Stevens, the guy who designed this. Between us, we've got 50 years, right? And these are the very pinnacle of everything that we know. So they actually sound better than a lot of, all valve. Just because it's all valve doesn't mean it sounds better. It's what you do with the blinking valves, So that's the thing with these, is give it a go, because it gives you the tone and the feel of an old tube product, but with all the convenience of being lightweight. I did a gig recently, finished the gig, and I picked up my amp, a 50 watt 2x12, and I picked up my guitar and I walked off the stage, I walked into the cab and put it in my car. You know what I mean?
That's a beautiful thing.
That's a beautiful thing. And you know what? That's what it's all about.
Right.
So please, let's make sure everybody gets a chance to try these things, because there's only upside. There's only upside with these products.
Right. Ian, what a pleasure.
Cheers, Mitch.
It's been a lot of fun. It's been great hearing you play, and what a fantastic amp. It's been, like I said, a real pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thanks, mate.
Hope you'll come back soon.
Oh, absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
And thank you for joining us here with Ian Robinson from Blackstar Amps. We have been checking out the St. James and talking about the future of tube amps. I mean, that's what really we're looking at here, is taking those traditional elements, those traditional designs, and really making them appropriate for the modern player. Be sure to check these out. I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater. I hope that you enjoyed this installment of the Plugged In Podcast by Sweetwater. Special thanks to Ian Robinson, one of the founders of Blackstar Amplification, for sitting down with me for this interview. Ian not only shared a ton of fascinating information about tube amps and tube amp design, but he's also a monster guitar player. And I love that, shall we say, heavily played guitar he brought along for the ride as well. Now you can learn more about all of the full range of amplifiers and cabinets from Blackstar Amplification by pointing your browser over to sweetwater.com, or as always, better yet, reach out to your Sweetwater sales engineer for full information. Thanks again for joining us today. I'm Mitch Gallagher, and this has been the Plugged In Podcast by Sweetwater.